بشر لا كالبشر بل هو كأل ياقوت بين الحجر.
एक अंसारी ने खड़े होकर तकरीर की जिसमें उसने ये कहा कि खिलाफत के हक़दार अंसार हैं और अब महाजरीन भी उन्हीं का हिस्सा हैं और महाजरीन को मुसलमानों के अमूर में अमल दखल का कोई हक़ नहीं। इसका जवाब हज़रत उमर ने देना चाहा मगर हज़रत अबू बकर ने उन्हें रोक दिया। फिर हज़रत अबू बकर रज़ी अल्लाह अन्हु ने गुफ्तगू फरमाई और कहा कि महाजरीन को हिजरत की वजह से अंसार पर फजीलत हासिल है और अपने हस्ब और नस्ब की वजह से तमाम अरब में मशहूर और मारूफ़ हैं और क़ुरैश होने के नाते उन्हें हुज़ूर से एक ख़ास निस्बत है क्योंकि हुज़ूर भी क़ुरैश में से थे। इसके अलावा अरब इनके सिवा और किसी की सरदारी कबूल नहीं करेंगे।
By the name of Malikul Mulk, the ruler, the possessor of all the domains, whether it be earth or heavens. Similarly, the Quran is a book that emphasizes justice, social justice, political justice, economic justice. And the example of the Prophet, which is Misak-e Madina, the Covenant of Madina, is something that distills the spirit of the Quran into concrete reality of human affairs. And hence, in an Islamic society, it is important to keep in mind the ultimate criterion for realizing what is a good society is justice. The spiritual principles cannot be divorced from political realities in an ideal Muslim state and in an ideal Muslim society. A society of pious and knowledgeable people is the society which is the Islamic ideal. A society in which the life, liberty and honor is protected of all individuals by other individuals. In the Islamic tradition, identity of citizens, of adherents of certain religions, of people within a society and a state is based on not the distinctions between race, language and ethnicity. Rather, they're based on what one believes in. Islam has always approached, historically Muslims have also always approached the other communities, whether minorities or majorities, as religious communities. It is not important where one is born or the color of one's skin. What is important is what is it that one believes in. On the basis of those beliefs and values, which are often shared beliefs and values, Muslims have successfully been able to relate with several non-Muslim communities without annihilating them. Whereas most of the pre-Muslim communities, pre-Islamic communities living within the Dar al-Islam, within the abode of Islam, are still around today. And this is largely attributable to the notions that exist inside of the Quran, the example of the Prophet, and all of the fetters that the Islamic Sharia has imposed upon what the rulers can do and they cannot do. The Quran says that God is Al-Malikul Mulk. He's the possessor of all domains. All power and authority and sovereignty ultimately belongs to God. Then we have the example of the Prophet in Covenant of Madina that has to a large extent realized the Quranic ideals in the society of Arabia. The Covenant of Madina established few things. First of all, it consolidated all of the loosened, warring tribes of Arabia, especially beginning with Medina. Then it also helped put together all of the religious communities, the coexistence of majority and minorities, the nascent Muslim community, as well as other people of the book and the Sabians and the Bedouins and so forth. The Covenant of Madina also establishes the fact that the spiritual principles cannot be divorced from political realities. The Prophet as a statesman and the Prophet as a supreme pontiff of God were at once lived realities for Muslims. This also brings us to a point where the ultimate referent of Muslim community, the Ummah, has to be discussed. The Ummah has been referred, the concept of Ummah has been referred by the Quran about 63 times. God has said that we have created you into Ummah and different Umum. And the Prophet's Misaq Madina, the Covenant of Madina, was a first step in consolidation of such Ummah. The second step is that of the Millah, is also defined in English language as a community. The Millah can be within an Islamic state, within the society, and across the frontiers of state and society as well. To safeguard the concepts of Ummah and Millah is the institution of Caliphate, of Khilafah. The Khilafah is of two types. It has historically been realized by the Sunnis. It also has been realized by the Shias. But before the Shia and Sunni cleavage began, the Khulafai Rashidun, the four rightly guided caliphs, also are examples for Muslims as that type of rule which after the Covenant of Madina was still the most enlightened rule. Since then, Muslim political philosophers, theologians, and so forth have stipulated several requirements for the office of the caliphate. They are unified in arguing that God has called man as Khalifatullah, which is man's vicegerent on earth, God's vicegerent on earth. But at the same time, the Muslim tradition also emphasizes the caliph, the ruler of such men, as the Khalifatul Rasulullah, somebody who holds the Islamic tradition from the prophetic times and is the legitimate holder of such office, which requires all of these attributes that the Prophet himself had. The caliph in the Sunni tradition, just like the Prophet himself, must have within him those qualities, the qualities of sound mind and body, sound judgment, piety and knowledge, and also a grip on Islamic sciences, especially when he is going to be the custodian of the Sharia. The Shia tradition has a small variety, has a small variation from the orthodox Sunni position, in which the Shia authorities have emphasized that the Imam must be one of the descendants of the Prophet, and the Imam must be is considered by most of the Shias as Masoom, as inerrant, and he cannot be elected but only selected. The Sunni authorities, on the other hand, allow for a mutual consultation and election of Imam, although not all of the theologians have agreed on the election of the Imam. Nonetheless, this election is not an election that takes place in accordance with today's democratic principles, but by a smaller electoral college, that is a group of people who are at the higher level of knowledge and piety. These are the people who can actually vote a caliph in the office. In the old order of things, it was God, king, and the country that was a valid matrix for political rule. In the newer order of things, it was a state and subjects, states and citizens, in which God has been absent, has been fundamental in the secular world. Within the older order of things, it was possible to approach the older minorities and vast majorities and make them subject to divine laws, especially in the Muslim world, that protected its minorities as the people of the book and as dhimmis. In the new order of things, all of the entities that are religious entities have been removed from the public sphere and made subject to the secular laws, which has led to an intellectual and political uprising in the Muslim world since the last 150 years. Muslims today still believe in the traditional ideals of politics. The institution of Khilafah, the notion of Ummah, and the system of Millah is still very close to their heart. But one thing is for certain, that the colonial disintegration of the Muslim world has posed many problems. And the model that has been brought to the Muslims is the either democratic capitalism or the democratic socialism of the West. According to the Muslim tradition itself and the Muslim political thinking, the modern world is the world of extremes. On one hand, you have the liberal secular world of the Western European states, and then secondly, you had across the Iron Curtain the communist states of the Western world. Now, Islam is silent and accommodative of both. Islam believes in transmission of private property, in making an earning for the sake of profit, and also believes in charity. But the opposition that has come about in the political extreme of the modern world, that on one hand in the liberal secular world, in the capitalist world, the wealth and materialism have become a good unto themselves. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, which is the communist world, for a good period of 80 years, we see that there is the notion of charity, but it is charity without Christ. So neither is acceptable to Islam. Yet, socialism and private property systems are both accommodated by Islam. Wealth in the Islamic political system is like a ladder on which you can ascend to heavens, and it is also the same ladder on which you can descend to hell. Now, when it comes to discussing democratic socialism or democratic capitalism of the Western ideals, one has to keep in mind the nexus between money and politics in the modern world. The modern world itself, the modern political system themselves suffer from this sway of materialist capitalism and hijacking of democracy. And today, a situation has arisen in which all of those people whose ideals were democracy in the West seems to be shifting. Democracy is no longer as popular within the West as it once used to be. The modern elite is ambivalent about democratic system, given the new changes that have come about that are of demographic nature, in which the white majorities of most of the Western countries could become minorities in the next generation. If this is so, do we still want democracy in those countries? And the Western elite is still very much ambivalent on that. But about capitalism, they're very much sure, because it exaggerates the difference between haves and the have-nots, and hence could legitimize minority rule. For Muslims, it is very important to understand that democracy as such, in its Western notions, is not a cause of development and richness and power that the Muslims seek. It is an effect of all of that. And capitalism as such, in its most crude form, cannot be accepted in this consumerist, materialist form. So how is it that the Muslims can come to power and then transform these very notions remains to be seen. What is important to understand in the modern world is how wealth and materialism has hijacked democracy. The question of money and politics, which is not only plaguing the political systems in the Western countries, but also of all the other countries in the modern world. To overcome the fragmentation that has beset the Muslim world, to resuscitate the ideals of Ummah and Millah today, the Muslims have to look at how the Western politics themselves have transformed from being hyper-national politics of the world wars to the European Union. Even the most secular of all the societies that ripped each other apart not that long ago are in a symbiotic relationship with one unit monetary system and moving swiftly towards an integration of foreign policy and defense. The Muslim world, which is locked into so many political units, small and weak political units with heavy defense budgets, must do the same. There is so much in the Islamic tradition that emphasizes unity, tawheed, in all its levels, including the political level. It must be realized. And for the Muslim states, no matter wherever they are today, must integrate their foreign policies and their systems of defense in such a way that the institution of millat once again comes into being to safeguard the material and the symbolic interests of the Ummah.